Hello. Becky Papano and myself, Courtney Niddle, are both board certified behavior analysts within the Pottsgrove School District. We're providing the training today for Summer Playground, and we wanted to start by saying thank you for everything you do. You are the reason why this program is able to occur in the summer and support our students. Today's agenda, we are going to be discussing our populations that we serve at Pottsgrove School District and that you will be supporting during the summer at Summer Playground. Also some factors that impact the brain, implementation of positive behavior interventions and supports, what you might know as our Falcon 4 at the Pottsgrove School District. There is a group activity, and we're going to talk about some do's and do nots of de-escalation. One of our favorite quotes, "It is easier to prevent a behavior before it occurs than to deal with it after it occurs." Basically, a lot of what we talk about is going to be focusing on how can we prevent situations from happening rather than investing our time into reacting and dealing with the situation after problems have already developed. You make a difference every day. This is a video that we really love because it allows for some reflection on how the way we interact with our students can make a difference. So while you watch this, really think about the differences between the first part and the latter part, and think about how that could change and make a difference in the lives of our students, just in the way that we interact with them and build those relationships. This slide and the next few slides discuss the statistics of the population of the students that we serve at Pottsgrove School District. Overall, some of the things that kind of stick out are our students with individualized education plans that receive specific supports. It's about 21% of our overall population. Students who receive accommodations for their support to support their learning, about 134 out of 3,000 students. So just something to kind of think about as we continue to discuss some of the things that might impact our students' learning, and support and foster their growth. This is a video that just provides a perspective of, again, the students that we service might have strengths and they might have limitations, and of those we might not always be able to directly see them, and understanding those strengths and limitations can support us in being able to help them. This is a great poem titled "'Cause I Ain't Got a Pencil." We included this because we really just wanted to also discuss how our students and even ourselves really, some things might be happening in their lives outside of what we might be aware of, outside of what we might be in direct control of, that really kind of build up. And as this particular student, he had to wake himself up. He had to put on some dirty clothes. The lights weren't on. He's having to get his siblings ready. He didn't get to eat breakfast. And then here we are fussing about a pencil. So just kind of reflecting on how the resiliency of some of our students and some of the things that they might be experiencing that could overall impact behavior. This slide introduces the idea that there are many important factors that can help us understand someone's behavior. So when we talk about development and the lifespan, the children that we're working with are really learning how to get their basic needs met, adapting to and learning as they kind of grow. The conditions and diagnoses here, we're really talking about neurological conditions that they might be experiencing, as well as any physical conditions that might be occurring. Insomnia, medication, hunger, pain, those types of things that can also impact behavior. We're going to dive a little deeper into the experience of trauma, but just being aware that individuals may have suffered from trauma in the past, but this is not just limited to abuse, neglect, or harm. When we talk about social factors, there might be cultural or history or family structure that impact behavior, as well as any identity factors that play a significant role. Strengths and limitations, our students have these just as we all have. These may impact functioning that affect a person's memory, attention, their impulse control. We all have strengths and limitations, or both, in these domains. We already touched on how trauma doesn't necessarily just mean physical harm. There are things that we all experience that can really be traumatic: loss of a family member, a pet, divorce. These things that really impact, these experiences that impact us. They also, what we really wanted to make sure to touch on is that they impact the brain and the way that our brain functions. So we put a little visual on here to really just talk about how these areas of the brain may be impacted by experiences that our students or ourselves have, which also can correlate to the responses that we're going to talk about next. So keeping in mind that our students were not always going to be aware of things that might have happened in their past, or things that they're experiencing, or if they have a history of trauma. So just be mindful that anyone might have experienced some of these events. This slide gives a visual in regard to the responses to trauma: fight, flight, and freeze. They might be concepts that you've heard of before, but behavior can really manifest differently. So what Johnny might do might look different than what Fred might do as a problem behavior. So this gives an idea of some of the behaviors that you could potentially see, what they could be trying to communicate, and being mindful of how those responses to trauma, which are impacted by the brain, might impact the way that the behavior looks. During the in-person training, we didn't read this slide word for word, but as a group, we kind of discussed that. Again, the brain is impacted by trauma, and how the survival brain can kind of take over, where these behaviors or these things might occur that they're not necessarily in control of, and being mindful of smell and words and touch and all of those things that might evoke the trigger of the survival brain to kind of take over and make those appropriate, rational decisions based on the experiences that they may have had. And again, behavior is a form of communication. So they are communicating something to us, but again, if that survival brain takes over, it's kind of really shutting down their ability to learn in that moment, and we've got to focus on that rather than pushing, whatever that academic piece is, and being mindful of the way that we interact with the students to, again, really prevent this survival brain concept from taking over. PBIS, or Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, is really an evidence-based framework that supports in creating an overall positive school climate. So this video talks about the important aspects in PBIS, what we might know as like our Falcon 4 at Pottsgrove, and review of our expectations. So it'll dive deeper into that. And then the visual just kind of gives an overall, the idea of PBIS is there's a 3-tier model, where your tier 1 is the students, the majority of the students that you're supporting with those interventions that are in place, and your tier 2 interventions and tier 3 interventions are more so for students that are needing additional supports to what's in place on the universal level. At the summer playground, the majority of your students will be within that tier 1, and maybe a couple of students that receive some secondary interventions or need a little bit more support. But those are the group of students that you will be supporting during the summer. One of those aspects that went over in the video is the idea of developing a common language and review of expectations. So we took the Falcon 4 and developed summer playground expectations. I won't read through those, but taking the same ideas of safe, be responsible, be respectful, and be positive, and breaking them into what behaviors, what does it mean to be safe on the summer playground? What does it mean to be positive on the summer playground? And why do we do this? It provides us that universal language that we can refer back to. It provides consistency and structure for our students. It helps us to refocus on what the students should be doing rather than what we want them to stop doing, reinforcing those positive behaviors. It's really important with expectations that we focus on teaching them, because just like any other behavior, like tying your shoes or learning how to do a math problem, we're taught those things. And it's the same concept with behavior. We can't assume that our students already know how to engage in these behaviors. So this is a poster that was made. There's a couple other supports that we'll go through, but it really helps with outlining and redirecting students. During our training, we had a wonderful volunteer that sang the Falcon Force song, but just another great way to engage the students in the summer activities, cultivate that supportive environment, and refer back to our expectations that were set. With being safe, responsible, respectful, and positive, those behaviors look differently based on where we are, right? So your wonderful supervisor created expectations matrix, and I believe with your feedback as well, which is great, of how our students can be safe, be responsible, be respectful, and be positive in those different areas. And again, this will be something that you, especially in like that first week with your students, are explicitly teaching them as they make it fun, make it engaging, but teaching them, okay, when we're on the playground, somebody tell me, how are we going to be safe? And reviewing that with them, and then as you're working with the students throughout the day, consistent reminders of, oh, great job being responsible. Show me how we're responsible here on the playground. Those types of things. Another great proactive support that you will have during the summer is this signed agreement. So this allows the students to really engage in understanding the rules, and I'm signing to agree to them. And again, getting their participation in the fact that they're going to follow the expectations. And you can refer back to this as needed. And again, reminding them ahead of time, like, we all signed this agreement, this is our contract, and these are the things that we're agreeing to do so that we can have fun. We did a fun little activity that, unfortunately, watching this virtually, you won't be able to participate in. But the idea here was that we broke into partners, which then turned into 4 groups, where you had partner 1, who would be trying to tell a story to the other partner 1. And your partner 2s became distractors. So they were singing songs, they were repeating the story, they were making faces, they were doing whatever things they needed to or chose to do to distract the person from speaking. We then switched roles and took a little bit of time to debrief. In that debrief, we talked about what that experience was like for them, what aspects were really difficult, how this activity related to our learners, and maybe some different techniques that we might try. Got a lot of good feedback. Most people said that they couldn't focus, that they were very distracted. Some of the participants shared that they actually ended up as the distractor engaging in the conversation that was happening. And then we just overall talked about how it was a very obvious distraction because all of us were in the same room and the volume got louder, which is an experience for our students that noisy, loud environments can be really difficult or triggering for them. But we also discussed how our brains, sometimes a lot of things can be going on and we might not immediately see that or be aware of that. And too much talking can sometimes impact the way that our students are processing. There was a lot of great feedback that was shared. We also related it to how our students sometimes have a difficult time with their peer interactions, right? So joining in conversations, for us, that might have been more normalized. However, for our students, that might actually be difficult for them and create more of an issue because they weren't directly talking to that peer that joined in the conversation. And talking about techniques that work with our learners, one person had shared that they think that they might support their students because it worked for them in picking one thing to really focus on and in their brain talking about that one object or thing to help kind of refocus in their attention and then re-engage in whatever the activity is. We talked about limiting distractions, noisy environments, working in quiet areas, moving students away from each other as needed. We also talked about having very clear and limited language, not using too much verbiage or words with our kiddos, as they might only pick up every other word or hear the last word that you said. And we additionally talked about providing some wait time to have them process whatever the requests are that you're making. This visual regarding the escalation cycle just really speaks to the fact that behavior can kind of go up in steps in a way, and then it comes back down. And again, there might be some additional bumps along the way before hitting that recovery or full de-escalation piece. With this visual on the next slide, kind of talking about these steps, we just wanted to point out specifically that it's important to really intervene at the earliest onset if we're aware of those triggers and know what kind of evokes problem behaviors from occurring. How can we prevent them or intervene as early as possible so that the behaviors do not get more severe and the student does not struggle more. We also talked about as a group that idea of the post-crisis depletion. So there might be times where the student just kind of crashes or withdraws more and isn't ready to really talk at the moment. And that's important to really consider as well, because we want to make sure when we're processing with the kids, even if they might appear to be de-escalated, that we're getting their input too, as if they're ready to talk, or if they're ready to kind of come together if there was a peer conflict, to restore that. So just being mindful of those types of things when working with our students who may be engaging in problem behaviors. So we discussed wanting to intervene when we're initially seeing those signs of agitation and frustration, and when we know those known triggers are occurring that typically lead to behaviors of concern. So we know that, but we also recognize that sometimes it is not always possible to prevent behaviors from happening or to prevent the escalation from happening. Sometimes things happen a lot quicker than others. So just acknowledging that. You have a lot of great things in place that will ultimately prevent behaviors, and in teaching the expectations again to the students. There's ticket systems that will be in place, so all of those are really great. And there will be systematic rules that are also in place for if a student exhibits X, Y, and Z. There might be specific things that occur just as ground rules with the families that are created. Verbal de-escalation goes against everything they told you about dealing with behaviors. So really what we talked about with this particular slide is that idea of changing the student's brain. So we might talk about some preferred things with the student to get them to focus on something else rather than focusing on whatever the situation is that's problematic for them. And then that might help us kind of kickstart a conversation with them. In our training, we talked a lot about some situations that you may have experienced in previous years at Summer Playground, just some general strategies. But again, we reviewed that there is no prescribed way to de-escalate, just guidelines. We talked about what worked for John may not work for Mary, and what worked for Mary on Monday might not work for Mary on Tuesday. So there is no, we wish there was, but there is no way to kind of outline, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this, because our students all are different, and some things might work for some and some might not work for others. And it's important to just kind of use the strategies that we've reviewed, again, as tools in your toolkit, as guidelines to support in de-escalating. So now what? We talked a lot. We gave a lot of information about behaviors. So what do we do? What do we do when they happen, or what do we do to prevent them? What are some strategies? So this list, I won't go through all of them, and we actually talked a lot about them naturally during our training, but just some things that really stick out is remembering to build those positive relationships, getting to know them. I think it will be really helpful if you get information from the parents, which it sounds like the plan is, about things that they like, because you can use that not only to distract their brains, but to help build that relationship and share similar interests. Using that calm, neutral tone. We're not going to raise our voices as they scream at us, or that type of thing. always focusing on prevention. How can we prevent things so we don't have to worry so much about the reaction piece? Limiting our language, making sure that we're not using too many words, giving too many multi-step directions, making sure that there's one person talking at a time, going back to our distraction activity that we did, how that can be overwhelming if there's too many voices. And then always, when possible, pointing out those positives. Even as things are happening, if a student is having a really hard time and you ask them what's wrong and they say, I don't want to talk about it, that's still an opportunity for you to say, like, I really appreciate you letting me know. I'm going to give you some time and then I'll ask you again if you're ready to talk. So any positives that you can really point out, which can also happen when the student is exhibiting behaviors. And things that you want to make sure you avoid: discussing behaviors in front of the child. Some of you may have experienced when you are in a room and the teachers are talking and you're sitting there and you're like, I'm right here, like I can hear you. It definitely can cause more frustration and, again, escalate behaviors. Threatening consequences while they're agitated. Consequences, both positive and negative ones, are of course important, but in that moment, which the last video here at the bottom you'll kind of see as we refer back to the Breakfast Club, is as you continue to kind of just threaten consequences, it's really not supporting with de-escalation, and honestly, as the staff member, you'll probably forget what you even had said. Making sure that we're aware of personal bubbles, everyone's is different, and avoiding those power struggles. If you find yourself kind of going back and forth with a student, just stop, just pause. There is no winning in these situations. It's okay that they have the last word, and I know sometimes that's really difficult. Making sure that you're not ignoring the child, but you can ignore those problem behaviors. You can provide choices. Do you want to walk with me or go get a drink? Or do you want to do this activity or this activity? Remember, it's not about you either. So when I say that, I mean they might say some things that can really get under your skin, but try not to take it personally. You're not the problem in this situation. You're just the recipient of what might be happening. So try not to take it personally. And again, use those strategies if you need to switch with a staff member. That's a really great strategy to use in supporting with de-escalation. And we talked about this during our training, but sometimes there might be two staff members that do the exact same thing, and it works for one and it doesn't work for the other, and that's okay. Don't take that personally either. Sometimes just that switch of face can really do a big difference, or maybe someone that has a better relationship with the student can really support in those moments. These last 3 slides just give some visual for additional strategies to use in supporting students, both on the preventative side, which is where we want to focus, but also ways that we can support with de-escalation. So look through those visuals, and they'll be posted on the portal that you utilize for all of your resources for Summer Playground, because you might get some additional tools to add to your toolkit, and hopefully they work positively for you. If you do have any questions that come up, if you reach out to your supervisors, they do have the direct contact information for Becky and myself. We'd be happy to answer those. We did have some great questions that came up in discussion as a group that I'll kind of discuss as well. So the idea of a bell kind of came up in talking about transitioning between activities. So sometimes they just kind of get used to our voices, or they're hearing our voices all day long. So that bell can kind of provide a different environmental cue that something is happening. Again, teaching that when they first start. So when the students are their first week starting, say something like, when you hear this sound, ding, everyone back to their seat. Let's practice that. Transition warnings, like 5-minute warnings, 2-minute warning, time to transition, those are also helpful in providing predictability as well as supporting with a smooth transition, so they don't feel like things are just kind of taken away or over and they didn't have warning. There was also an example that was shared about a student last year who wouldn't get on a bus for a trip. So we kind of talked about being mindful. Some of our students might be walkers. The bus might be a new experience for them. It might be a scary experience for them. Some things that we might consider, or if there are days prior that we can review, maybe like a social story or narrative of sorts, which might look like we're going to the park on Friday. First, we grab our lunch, we walk to the bus. Which seat are we going to sit in? When we're going to have fun playing. This helps kind of make that experience a little bit more predictable for them. And any time when you can have the student actually practice the skill paired with reinforcement will always help. And of course, whenever that's possible. We talked about some situations where you might want to separate peers and remove them away from them, such as when they're arguing, as a good time to intervene to prevent it from getting more physical or more severe. We talked about teaching turn taking, for example, or just using timers in general. So a lot of our students might have a difficult time if they both want to be on the swing at the same time and there's only one swing available. You might set a timer. Joe's going to have a turn for 1 minute, then Lacey, you'll get your turn for 1 minute, and use that timer so they can kind of see it is coming, and helps kind of focus in on what you're saying as well. Your system's also going to be using tickets. Use those to your advantage. Give them out to positively acknowledge so the kids find benefit in following the rules, and it can really help us as staff to focus more on the positive behavior rather than putting all of our attention into the reactive or the negative behavior. So again, if there's any questions that come up, please reach out to your supervisor. I'd be happy to help with that. And have a great summer. Good luck at Summer Playground.